was going to say good evening and welcome, but it is actually in the morning. That might be because I'm still recovering from a bit of a flu. So this is CTO Life Line with your hosts Noah Cantor and Daniel Walters. And today we're going to be discussing a very interesting topic. Why don't we delegate more? So before we jump into that, Noah, do you want to share a little bit more about yourself?
Yeah, sure. So, hey everybody, welcome back if you've been here before. I'm your co-host, Noah Cantor. I'm a tech leadership coach. I've been working in and around technology for more than 20 years. I've worked in organizations ranging in size from 3 people to more than 160,000 and across all areas of technology, service desk to back end, DevOps to leadership. And now I work with people all over the world as a coach and a fractional CTO.
And I'm Daniel Walters. So I was the former CTO and CIO for Seek Asia, the CPTO for a local startup here in New Zealand, weirdly. And these days I work as principal consultant and CTO coach. So Noah, in our first episode, we talked about how we can support team performance. And one of the areas we mentioned out of the great range of areas that can contribute to a team's performance was how we empower them, how we can support delegation of decision making and ownership to those teams. So today we're going to dig right into this topic. How do you think about this topic, and what comes to mind first?
So I think delegation is a really interesting topic because I think it feels complete when we talk about it, but is actually only half of the kind of range of possibilities. And for anyone who's been kind of following this conversation on LinkedIn, like they know that delegation is not a term that I'm altogether comfortable with. And we had some really interesting conversations that really helped me articulate why. And at the core of it is that we start with delegation starts with the assumption that all forms of decision making are some variant of delegation. There are charts out there that we'll actually get to today that have levels of delegation on them. And they're great, but they're incomplete. And the reason I say that is that starting assumption that all forms of decision making that teams make are some form of delegation, I think is wrong. And the reason I think it's wrong is that it's based on a lot of industrial era thinking at a time when power and knowledge and capability were centralized. They're focused on the top. And then those are pushed out to people as needed and if they're competent. And words like empower and devolve and delegate all come from that sort of thinking. But delegating means that somebody with power and ability to make sure that something gets done is handing responsibility to somebody else. And the implicit threat there is that if they screw it up, whatever degree of freedom that has been delegated to them can be taken away. And a lot of the leaders that I talk to don't want to work that way. And there's a much more recent approach, which I first came across when I was learning about systems thinking, that's pull-based instead of push-based. And so pull-based decisions are when power is assumed to be in the hands of people who have the knowledge necessary to make good decisions. It's when companies hold the perspective that, yes, of course, the development team or the product team will be responsible for that. They chose that responsibility. And in a pull-based system, there is no delegation because people pull what they need. If they've chosen to be responsible for something, and choice is actually really key, but they don't have the skills, then they ask for help finding the skills or getting them. If they have made that choice and they don't have the knowledge, they pull it. So information and decision making is focused on endpoints instead of being centralized. And so the role of senior leadership in a pull-based system is to support their people rather than push things out to them. And by support, we mean however they need it, and then represent those people in conversations with other parts of the organization. Because, like it or not, talking to other executives, talking to other parts of the business, identifying strategy, like those are different skills and they're necessary skills in many organizations, but they're not skills necessarily that teams or individual contributors want to have or want to develop. And so leaders play a very different, much more supportive role in those sorts of organizations. And when leaders that I talk to want to talk about how they reduce the work on their plate, we talk about push and pull based systems. And if they're more comfortable and they want to work in a push system, then we talk about delegation. But
Mm.
if they're keen on a pull based system, but they don't know how to get there, then we talk about that instead. And so it's a very different set of conversations, and they're both valid and they're both powerful. But when we limit the conversation to delegation, we miss quite a lot of what's possible.
Hmm. Yeah, I agree that how delegation is understood is more narrow than the range of opportunities there, and there are more dynamics, whether it's pull or push. Um, One of the choices we made was to title this episode using the word delegation, for the purpose of reaching the broadest audience, so that people would have a sense of what we're talking about. And I think the thing that's interesting for me is, I think I'm 100% aligned. This is where we're striving to. And early on, when coaching leaders, seeding this thought can be helpful, but it doesn't always resonate with them. At the first hit, because they're still in that process of opening up to the possibilities. And so I find it's good to test with the reframing, but if you can get some progress by even expanding current thinking around delegation, which is already probably thought more narrowly than it should be, then they can start to see the possibilities when they get some successful progress.
Oh, absolutely.
So how do you how do you approach this sort of reframing? So you have a conversation about push and pull. Can you go a bit deeper on how you approach that conversation?
So I think a lot of it starts with conversations around what it is that leaders really want to achieve. And by that, I mean, we're frequently exposed to uh, leadership that comes from historical ways of working. And that the implicit assumption is that, people are less important than efficiency. And if the decisions that we make negatively impact people, um, but it helps the company, that's a trade-off that we're definitely willing to make. And a lot of the leaders that I talk to don't want to be making those decisions. Like that's not where they want to end up. And it's not that they're afraid to make those decisions. It's that when they get to that position, they often feel trapped, as if they accept the humane approach and they work on things from a humane perspective, they'll be judged for it and it will negatively impact them. And so a lot of our work starts with just understanding the kinds of leaders that they want to be. How do they want to approach things? How do they want to talk about them? What sort of relationships do they want to have with their teams and with their coworkers? And then delegation and decision making and kind of how teams are structured and how power is structured kind of naturally fall out of that as that discussion progresses.
And uh, when it comes to them asking their teams to be responsible for more, like where do they start? How can they take some steps, down that path of where they may have been previously in this situation of forcing many decisions through them. How to what's the first step for making a shift?
I think the first step is often really difficult because the first step involves, I think, communicating with the team about the change that you want to make.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason I think that's the important first step is everybody gets used to the system that they're operating in, right? They get used to the stimuli that they get, and they optimize and they figure out how to respond to those in a way that actually makes things smooth and makes things run. But if, as a leader, you're going to change that, and in any kind of significant way, and actually shifting delegation is actually really significant change, it's really important to have that conversation, because if you don't have it, the risk is that the team will continue to respond in the way that it's always responded. And all of a sudden you'll have a mismatch between your expectations and their expectations, and it will cause friction. And so I encourage people to start with a conversation. Talk to the team about what you're trying to achieve. Talk to the team about why it's different. Talk to them about what you're hoping for and what you're looking for, so that they can be helpful, they can adjust, they can understand, and they can respond appropriately.
My apologies. I think my broadband provider dropped out briefly.
That's all right. I think we're okay. But actually, I have a similar question for you. Like, you talk to people about delegation, right? And so, where does that actually show up? Like, what do you often find the conflicts and the troubles that people are trying to figure out? And how does delegation show up in those conversations?
Yeah, good question. So it often shows up when people are overloaded as the
Okay.
first bit,
Yep.
and that's starting with the leader and a challenge that they have. So it's not even always purely about empowerment or the end goal. It's about what's a problem right in front of us. And I mean, there's many other ways to free up time, and so we normally go through those first because they're easier. But you eventually arrive at okay, well, how are you how are you involved in the different types of work that's happening, and should we start to question that involvement? It may be you're still involved, but the way you engage with that is different. So this might be a good juncture. A resource that I've leveraged in the past was out of Management 3.0's delegation poker. Now, I don't necessarily run the exercise, but I have been known to sort of show this visual, which sort of talks about some of the different ways that a leader might engage with their team on some work. They could be telling them, go do this. They could be selling them, like, pitching the bigger picture, and even that is going to create slightly more opportunity for the team members to make some decisions and take some ownership. Consultation, agreement, advising, inquiring, and delegating. So as you said at the top, I don't think this is nearly a complete view. I don't think this is a mutually exclusive, completely exhaustive view, but it's a helpful view to at least opening up different possibilities of, like, okay, maybe I can try this a different way with my team and have this conversation in a different way. Maybe I'm normally, telling, and maybe I can and try something different. Or maybe normally I'm consulting, but maybe I can go further along the spectrum. And I pair with this talking about situational leadership, because once you introduce this, a common question I get is, well, if I start doing this for everyone, I don't have the same trust level with everyone. And I'm like, well, that's okay. Uh, you can tailor your approach based on trust, competency, capability, your level of comfort, the level of risk, the blast radius, all of these factors, and use that to decide which approaches that you're taking. And so, what do you think about that approach?
I quite like it. I think there's a lot of merit to it. I think once you're in a push-based system, or if you're stuck in a push-based system, then understanding the kind of different levels of engagement that you have and the different possible levels, as well as you said, kind of your biases, the things that you default to, can make a real difference. And there's some combination, as you say, in situational leadership of competence and like management competence, team competence, organizational composition, and the additional context that kind of helps you understand what the most effective solution or most effective approach in any given situation is going to be.
So, in addition to that, another resource I've used to open up thinking and awareness of possibilities is John Cutler's mandate levels. So, this frame is more focused on what you're expecting the team to be responsible for, and it can go from hey, I expect you to build this thing that I just asked you, through to, hey, you're for this area of the organization, you're responsible for the overall outcome, the strategy, everything. So there's quite a spectrum, and again, you can apply this situationally because you're going to have different trust levels with different individuals and with different teams as well. And they also may have different comfort levels with these ways of working as well. So it's two way. It's both on it's on the comfort of both parties. And just to expand on that, so that those same categories, you can see that for different types of teams, there may be more or less flexibility on how they apply these levels of responsibility. They might be responsible for the strategy of one area that they're responsible for, but then also, maybe getting more direction on something else. Again, it might be influenced by the blast radius or the level of risk to the organization. And so organizations that are successfully empowering teams tend to be more sophisticated in how they're getting to this level of agreement between leaders and teams about what the team's comfortable take on and how the leaders support that. So Noah, or actually maybe right at this moment, I might cover a quick bit of housekeeping, which I forgot to do up the front of the show. We take comments all the way through, so your comments can guide our conversation. So if you've got questions on anything we've spoken about already, or as a topic comes up, there is something that could enable you to, address a situation that you have in your workplace, feel free to jump on the comments. I believe comments on YouTube, LinkedIn will all come through here, and we'll use those to guide our conversation in the show. So, Noah, what are the important elements for empowering teams. Like, what needs to be true for a team to be able to do great work and make great decisions?
So I think there's a combination of things about team capability, team maturity, and team authority. Right? There's essentially, if the team and willingness, actually, because not all teams are willing. Not all teams have had great experiences dealing with being given responsibility for things. And so when you're trying to figure out whether or not a team is going to be able to do some work, and want to think about, do they have the skills necessary to do it? If they don't have the skills, can they get them? Do they have access to the information that they're going to need in order to do the work? And if not, is it easy for them to get? Are they willing to do it, as we talked about? And do they actually have the authority to make the decisions that are necessary? Or are they going to kind of receive responsibility on paper, but not actually in practice? And so when we think about kind of from the team's perspective, those are what you want to think about. There's also, from a leader's perspective, there's, are they ready? We talk about the mandate levels. We talk about the how prepared they are, what their default is. But in order for the team to be successful, the leader also has to be willing to let them make decisions, and that includes making mistakes. And that's, I think, really tough for a lot of people, is letting someone else be responsible for some work, consciously knowing that there's a chance that they're not going to get it right. And I think this is really difficult for frontline managers a lot of the time, people who are just looking, for the first time, have stepped from being a really capable individual contributor into a management position. And all of a sudden they go from being responsible for delivering something great to being responsible for creating an environment for other people to do something great. And all of a sudden, a lot of the things that they know and their willingness to get their hands dirty and their willingness to do things can get in the way of their actual ability to delegate and grow teams and help other people mature. And so we need to understand for the leader or the manager, what position are they in? Are they ready to hand things over? Do they know what it's going to take? Are they ready to let people make mistakes? Because I think it's really important that we don't end up with a mismatch between team expectations and leader and manager expectations, because then you end up with conflict that often we don't understand, like the nature of, and we don't understand how we got to that conflict, or we end up in a position where things happen in name only. And so we talk about how empowered our teams are. We talk about how we devolve authority. But when we talk to the people in the teams, they're taking orders, they're punching tickets, and they're not actually contributing anything. They're just reacting. And so when we think about kind of what is it that's going to make the team successful, we need that combination of how ready is the team for this and how ready is the leader for it.
So you mentioned a few key themes here. So we talked about authority, and so there's a power element, which is why this almost always needs to start with leadership, because that is where power has accumulated, and so the disbursement of that power starts with a change in the approach from leadership. You also spoke about some of the worries that might cause hesitation for empowering teams more. So the fear of something going wrong and really impacting the reputation of the leader by looking worse because something went wrong under their watch, can cause them to pause and hesitate in empowering when they should. That can combine with the innate rush to solve and certainty bias that we all have, which is to say things like, I can do this quicker myself, which is only ever true in a very narrow time constraint. Let's say, for instance, you are the most experienced person in a particular topic, or the most competent in a particular area. How will that ever change if every time you are given the opportunity to enable someone else to pick that up, that instead, because of short-term efficiency, you take it up instead, or because of risk aversion, you take it up instead. So these are very human, very natural reasons to hesitate, but also really important things to overcome, because they represent overall improvement for your organization and what your team or organization are actually able to achieve. How did I do in sort of summarizing those themes, Noah? So, you go ahead.
I was going to say, I thought that was pretty good. I think there's a challenge, I guess, that we all face of are we ready for those things?
Mm-hmm.
Like, are we prepared to deal with the consequences of not being the best, not being the person to go to? Are we ready to share that knowledge with other people? We often, organizations often do things that result in some perverse incentives. So, like, if we reward people for knowing the most, we give the people with the most knowledge the most interesting work, then we incentivize them not to share that knowledge with other people. Because if they share that knowledge with others, then they'll stop getting the really interesting work and they'll start getting the work that they see everybody else getting. Mm-hmm. And so the way the organization kind of shares what needs to be done and distributes it, if it's a push-based system and we're pushing work out to people, really changes the ways in which people behave and the way that they act and what they're willing to take on.
Yeah, one of the ways I encourage leaders to take some steps down this path is to look for areas where it will be safer to fail. So what are the areas where we can test supporting and enabling teams to be empowered for more decision making, to take more responsibility, that won't represent existential threats to the organization. So where are the areas where we're safe to fail and safe to learn? Because those can be the places to start. Now, over time, through practice, the number of areas where you see it's safe to fail will actually expand, because you will gain more confidence. And there's some other approaches to how you engage and have conversations with teams that can also provide some guardrails or some safety features to making that happen. So, for instance, we shared the mandate levels. That's talking about what a team is responsible for, which I think is a really important part of the conversation. So if the team understands where their responsibilities start and finish, it means there's a frame for them to have conversations back with the leader when things are going outside of those responsibilities. And then the second thing that's really critically important to establish with the team is, what is your expectation for them to come back to you? So for some, situations, it might be, hey, we're going to have a fortnightly catch up, and you might share progress. For other situations, it would be like, hey, I don't need to hear about this unless it's going catastrophically wrong. So there's a whole spectrum of setting explicitly those expectations with teams. And so if you're going to have conversations and establish these expectations with teams, then I would make sure that you're definitely covering those two areas. Is there anything else that you feel is a critical part of a conversation between a leader and their team for establishing these boundaries, or other things that help them have more success with with them taking on more responsibility?
I think one of the things we haven't talked about yet is the question of whether or not the responsibility or the what we're considering delegating is part of a core responsibilities, right? It's there's been some stuff floating around on LinkedIn recently about if it's important and it's not urgent, delegate it. If it's important and urgent, do it yourself. Like there's some matrix that's Eisenhower's decision making framework, I think is what it is, and I can't remember the exact details. But one of the key questions for me is always, is this the role that you're supposed to be doing? Is it core to your success as an individual in the organization? And if it is, often that's something you want to hold on to. But when you're overloaded, it's often because we're reacting to things that aren't part of it. We're going to meetings that we don't need to be in. We're participating in things that we don't need to be there for. And the example I was using earlier of kind of the first time manager being promoted, they're still in the detail. And so they're not doing the things that are actually core to their role, the things that are really important for them to be successful, whether that's in some organizations, it's coordination. At some levels, it's driving strategy and having conversations with the rest of the business. If it's core to the work that you're doing and the role that you're doing, there's a good chance that you want to hang on to it. But there's often a lot less that's core to success than we actually are doing. So we often do more than we need to, I guess, is what I'm stumbling about trying to figure out how to say.
Mm-hmm. And so we shared some of our theories of how leaders end up there. When one of them is, the career paths. So similar. I know it was similar for both you and I. Our paths into technology leadership were through technical roles, and so we were promoted or moved through organizations and achieved some level of seniority, based on applying technical skill sets. And then over time, we started to realize that, we were expected to do more than just make computers do our bidding, right? So, I know for me personally, it involved making every mistake, under the sun. It was, I was definitely the person who would say, "Oh yeah, it would be quicker if I did it myself," and then do it myself. But at some point, I started to realize, hang on a second, the contribution that I can make that increases the impact my team or my organization could have involves me better supporting the team achieving more. And then I started to try and find some resources about, okay, how am I going to do that? How can I do that better than I did it yesterday? what was your journey like?
It echoes yours in a lot of ways. I find, looking back, that I probably fell in every hole it's possible to fall in on the way towards figuring out what I wanted to do and how to be good at it. Um, there were there were several times where I was in a management position and I still was the most technically capable person. And when I was in those roles, I made the same mistakes. When something needed to get done right and it needed to get done urgently, I would do it because it was faster. And that meant that the next time it was going to be faster. And the time after that, it was going to be faster. And all of a sudden, I'm still filling the role of an individual contributor instead of the role of a leader or a manager. And so it took some time to figure it out. But ultimately, what I was doing by continuing to do that work was I was stopping the people that reported to me from doing their best work. I was stopping them from learning. I was stopping them from growing. I was stopping them from ever being able to tell me to go away because we got this. You should go focus on, the things that you're supposed to focus on and the things that matter, and that you can do that we can't. And it took an intervention, not from the team, but from my mentor to say, do you realize what you're doing? Can you see it happening? And for him to tell me, among other things, that being a great leader isn't about knowing the answers. If you have a meeting with your team and you have the answers, then the meeting doesn't have a lot of value. And if you speak up when you don't know the answer, or even when there are multiple possible answers, if as a leader you speak up early, you will find that people converge on your answer, not because it's better than theirs, but because you artificially narrow the field by being the person with the most authority who is saying what they want to have happen. Everyone else adapts and converges and essentially follows the path. And so what he said was, this was some really useful advice. If you're the most knowledgeable or powerful person in the room, speak last. Let everybody else offer their viewpoints and offer their opinions and figure out if they can make something work before you get involved. Not because your opinion doesn't have value, but because the impact that you have on the team by speaking up isn't what you think it is. Sometimes you're being helpful and you're trying to be helpful. Sometimes you're hurting the team's ability to do stuff in the future by trying to be helpful. And it was that dynamic and it was that conversation that started shifting my views about what it meant to be a good leader. And I was just reading something else recently about how we prioritize as people, as social animals. We tend to give more credibility to the people that speak more. So the person who's most likely to become the leader of a group and therefore promoted into a leadership position is the person who dominates the floor most of the time. So the person who speaks most gets rewarded and then put into a position where they shouldn't be speaking at all or should be speaking last. And we don't acknowledge that. And we don't then teach them how to change that behavior. And we continue to reward kind of the wrong things. And so it's just a really interesting kind of tangent as part of this conversation is how we reward behaviors that are contradictory to success in the roles that we then put people in.
And it can also diminish ownership as well. So when you're speaking first and establishing, that sort of path or priority, then you see teams move into this mode of, all right, to succeed in doing this work involves interpreting what this leader meant, as opposed to, having their own, their own views and perspectives and ownership of, hey, I understand this problem really well, and I've got a good view of what we're going to try next to make progress on it. I see we've got a comment there from Mark Simpson. Oh, this is a good one. No one speaks twice until everyone speaks once. There we go. Well, if we had no nuggets to offer, thank you, Mark, for adding at least one into the live stream. I was just thinking, Noah, maybe this is why we have a live stream, because all those thousands of meetings where we've spoken last, or even better, not at all, that's pent up, and we have to put it onto the airwaves.
Like, it's got to come out somewhere, right? So it might as well be here.
Yeah. I would like to dig into some additional sort of just practical things that people can, that leaders in particular can apply. So I'm gonna start with one, and Noah, either comment on this one, or if you've got some other practical tips. So let's bring up this. So this is pulled out of a blog post that I wrote a while ago, and then recently released a freshly edited version of. And so one activity that I've conducted with teams, sometimes it will be for the team to conduct amongst themselves. Sometimes it'll be conducted across the team and leadership, or even multiple levels of leadership. Step one, not visible on the screen, is essentially a brainstorm of, like, what are all the things that we're responsible for, and just getting that out on the page. That in itself can be a really, I tend to run it in a 1 or 2 hour workshop, or even can be done offline in a Miro board, and everyone contributing to a mind map type diagram. But it can be really illuminating to actually get everyone's views on what we're responsible for and what we're collectively trying to manage. And then part 2 of this activity is to go and flatten that list. So that's what goes in the left-hand column. Naming these responsibilities. I tend to, I'm the outcomes guy, so I tend to recommend framing each responsibility as an outcome. And then for each of the roles, the people involved in the conversation, you can put role, or you can just put the names across the top. We play the game of, you can either select a responsibility that is one that you own and are responsible and accountable for, or you can choose to steal a responsibility that someone else in the game has already taken. And if you do steal, the only rule is you must have a conversation about why, and then together agree about what you do about that. And it might be you just had 2 definitions of the same responsibility and there wasn't as much overlap, or there was some sort of split or handover. There's a whole variety. But I find these conversations about getting more explicit about what all of us are responsible for can really take out lots of friction, which exists because these things are often not talked about. We just try and get about doing the work without that sort of understanding. Have you ever done anything like this, Noah, or have you got any thoughts or reactions?
So I have done something like this, and I know of something else similar to it. So I tend not to frame it in terms of responsibility, but I do talk about what are all of the things that are necessary for this team to be successful. Mm-hmm. What are the skills? What are the attributes? Like, what are the actual, I guess, properties of the team? Mm-hmm. And then we talk about, okay, well, of the people that we have in the team, which of these are you comfortable with? Which of these are things that you're confident that you can do? Which are things that other people are confident that you can do? And together, we match up. And so we put job descriptions aside, and we put aside all the other kind of formal things, and we just talk about what has to get done for us to be successful. And we marry up all the people and all the things that need to happen. And hopefully we get at least complete overlap. So all the skills and all the attributes are covered by someone in the team. But sometimes we don't. And when that happens, it actually makes really clear where the gaps are. And that's really helpful. And sometimes we end up with multiple overlaps, which is also really helpful because it means that multiple people can contribute in any given area at one point in time. It also, by listing the things the team needs to be successful, people who aren't there yet have the opportunity to say, actually, that's something that I would like to learn. And that's someone that I can learn it from. Can I work with, I'm going to pick on Mark because he put in a comment, but can I work with Mark to learn about, not speaking until it's appropriate to actually speak again? Or can I work with you, Daniel, to learn about, the next, what's happening with React? Because I've got an Angular background and I've been doing a lot of back end stuff, but I'd like to get back into front end work, and you know it and I don't, and therefore can we work together on it? And just by putting that stuff out in the open and making it really transparent and clear, we create opportunities for people to work together and for them to pull responsibilities and for them to make decisions on their own that were opaque before then. Because a lot of the time, this is something that happens around a management table, right? It's a group of people that sit down. Now, this time, you and me and Mark are, technical leaders, and we sit down and we say, right, well, my team can do this, and these are the things that we have, and these are the things that we need, and there's someone in your team that actually can fill a gap that we have, so we should move them. And everyone gets shuffled around behind the scenes, and nobody actually understands what's going on or why. By making it open, we just by its nature, we make it more inclusive. And I find that's really helpful. It helps people buy in more. It helps them engage more. And that actually makes it easier to delegate to them because we get a much clearer idea of what we're capable of and what we aren't.
Yeah, it's interesting. Sometimes when I've introduced, the idea of spending a couple hours or maybe even 3 hours, on these things, people are like, we don't have time for that, but we somehow have time for all the wasteful conversations that are related to the unaddressed frictions that present every single day until they're addressed head on. And so, yeah.
You just reminded me of a quote. There's never enough time to do it right. There's always enough time to do it again.
Yeah. Yeah. The one I always remember is, we waste years because we can't waste hours. Yeah. So, the other thing, go ahead.
I was going to raise another variant of this, but if you had more you wanted to say, then go ahead.
So I was just going to just have a close on this particular activity. This activity was a response. It was like the anti-racy. So racies for me have been. I can't think of a single time when it hasn't been a smell that is indicative of distrust. Now, I have seen racies used and they got beyond that. The trust was never mended, but I have seen racies used where the work eventually got done. But in about the most inefficient way possible. And so, yeah, in in my frustration with races and reading, I came across an article that sort of said, well, all you really need to know is who's responsible for the outcome, and everything else sorts itself out. So this is what led us to this sort of activity. No, was your other comment germane to that, or germane to time?
Well, I just wanted to shout out to Cherry Vu and Rob England, who
Mm-hmm.
do a lot of organizational change work in Vietnam and other places around the world. And one of the tools that they've developed is essentially it's a lot like what you had up there, but includes kind of shu ha ri, so the level of capability and expertise of each person in the team. So whether they're still following the book because they haven't mastered it yet, whether they're really good at it, or whether they're at a place where they can innovate and change and adapt just on the fly. And
Mm-hmm.
just by having those levels and the responsibilities and the people all combined, like they found that really helpful in driving conversations around how to change the organization so the right people are consistently in the right place at the right time, and the work can come to them rather than reshaping the teams every few months or at random in order to move people around from one place to the next. So I just wanted to mention them because I think they're doing
Yeah,
some great work.
that's a good call out, and the critical word there is conversations. So with our anti-racy approach, one of the things that makes it almost direct opposite of a racy is the conversations matter more than the final artifact. So yes, you can produce a table and it has all the responsibilities and all the names. And sometimes I've used that artifact moving forward. But most of the time, the thing that addressed most of the frictions were the conversations and that common understanding that was built amongst all the participants. All right. Well, we are coming up towards the end of the show, so we might do our best to try and summarize, Noah, because we've covered a lot of ground, and I might throw you in the deep end and get you to start.
Okay, thanks. So I guess to wrap up, today we've been talking about delegation and the kind of different things that are necessary in order for delegation to be successful. And bigger than that, delegation assumes a push-based model, but it's not. But push-based models aren't the only ones that have been successful in history, and not the only ones that exist. And so there are pull-based models that can be explored, where people, where people decide what they're going to do and how they're going to do it and how they're going to approach it, and the role of leadership is to support. But today, a lot of our focus was on delegation because that's a lot of where the people that we work with start. And so there are different levels, and the different levels of delegation and the are appropriate based on different contexts. So in a given situation, any given situation with a different team maturity, a different set of requirements, and a different maturity level for the leader, a different amount of delegation empowerment will be appropriate. And so just understanding where the team is using the things that we just discussed, and where the leader is and how they fit together, and then both having conversations about that are kind of the starting point for figuring out what's the appropriate amount of power, decision making, authority, responsibility, whatever you want to call it, the appropriate amount to actually allow the teams to have.
Exactly. And so what that means practically in terms of if you're at the starting point, so we mentioned that you can look for areas where it may be safe for the teams to fail. It won't be an existential threat for the organization if something goes wrong. You can have explicit conversations, so it might be with the CEO or the board or your peers, and say, hey, I'm going to be doing this change with my team, and they're going to be taking on more of this responsibility here. And then having a conversation with the team. Hey, team, we've been working this way. I would like to empower you more. I would like to know if you're feeling comfortable with that. And here are the parameters for what you're responsible for. And then secondly, here's when and how I'd like you to come back to me. It might be on a cadence. It might be, when certain events happen. So if you're having those explicit conversations, then you're setting up a scenario where you can try in a safe way and start to shift and build the confidence and get a read on where your capability is at for supporting teams and where the team's capability and appetite is at for taking this on. So I'd be really interested if for any leader who's on the live stream now or watching the recording, if you are taking that first step and you are trying things out and you put some of this into practice, it'd be really great to hear from you. Either DM us or in the comments on LinkedIn or YouTube, and let us know how it's going. If you would like some support with that, more tailored guidance for how to approach this, then feel free to reach out directly to us. So you can find Noah at noahcantor.com. Noah, do you want to share a little bit about the services and support that you offer leaders?
So as I mentioned at the beginning of the call, I do tech leadership coaching. So I help people figure this out, among other things. And I write about it quite a lot. I've got a whole host of posts that have been put up over time. We talk about delegation. We talk about power. We talk about all the things that a CTO really cares about. And it goes out on a regular basis. So feel free to come over and join in the conversation and ask questions. And actually, if there's something that you read that piques your interest and you want to talk about it, let me know. We can have a conversation, or I can write something about it.
And similarly, you can find me at my interestingly named blog. I need to get a new domain name, but the title of the blog is Great CTOs Focus on Outcomes. And I've been writing that one publicly for about 4 years. So similar to Noah, there's a lot of free content on there. There's plenty of people who engage and ask questions publicly and privately based on that content. I absolutely relish that. Also feedback, what did I get right, what did I get wrong. I do occasionally put out some outrageous hypotheses and do enjoy to be challenged. That's how I learn. So yeah, you can find me there. And if I also coach and consult, so you can engage me through there. We have one final bit of housekeeping. So Noah, do you want to share a little bit about what we've got in mind for guests?
Yeah, so Daniel and I really love having these conversations, and we like interacting with the audience, but we've been considering for a while whether or not we want to have guests. And so we're thinking that we will periodically bring people on the show to essentially join the conversation and hopefully disagree with us in some regards. Otherwise, it might be fairly dull, but definitely have really interesting conversations about all of these topics. And so if you know somebody you think would be great on the show, if you are somebody who would like to appear and you think you've got something that's worth talking about and a subject that's really worth exploring, then let us know. We haven't decided for sure, but we're pretty confident that we will be bringing guests on from time to time as it comes up. So we'd love to hear from you.
Awesome. Well, without further ado, that brings this episode of CTO Life Line to a close. We really thank you for taking the time out of the workday for those of you in Australia and New Zealand and other locations. We've really enjoyed doing the show for you, and we look forward to the next episode. And so until next time, set a direction, take the first step, check your progress. That's us.